The thing about betrayal is, it never screams. It just walks in wearing an expensive suit with a smug little smirk and tells you, "We don't need lazy people like you around here." That was the first thing he ever said to me as CEO. No hello, no handshake, just that. The boardroom went dead silent. You could hear the flicker of the projector and the nervous breath of someone near the coffee cart. But I didn't move, didn't flinch. I just looked at him. Brandon, my boss's son. The same Brandon who used to follow me around the office during summer internships, asking me how to run a client call. Now here he was, promoted overnight, gifted his father's empire like a spoiled child handed a loaded weapon, and the first thing he did with that power was aim it at me. 12 years. 12 years I gave that company. I was there before the rebranding, before the layoffs, before the investment drought that nearly drowned us in Q3. I'd pulled late nights, missed anniversaries, slept on that stiff leather couch in my corner office more times than I could count. But none of that mattered to him. Not my numbers, not my record, not my loyalty, because he didn't see me. To Brandon, I was just a leftover. One of the old guard. Someone his ego needed to erase so he could paint over everything in his own cheap gold. I remember the way he leaned on the table that morning, too casual, like he was rehearsing for a TED Talk he wasn't smart enough to give. He grinned when I didn't respond. "You don't seem surprised," he said. I wasn't. I'd seen it coming the moment his name started showing up on internal memos. Still, I stood slowly, smoothed my blazer, looked right at him, and I smiled. Noted. That's all I said. No defense, no emotion, just grace, because I knew something he didn't. I left the room without looking back. That afternoon, I packed up my things quietly. My nameplate, my photo with the team, the mug they gave me on my 10th work anniversary. It said, "She who runs the place," hand-painted in gold. I wrapped it in tissue, placed it in a box. Didn't cry. But when I got home, I poured myself a glass of red wine, the heavy kind, let it breathe, and then I just sat. On the floor, shoes still on, phone turned off. It's funny. I always imagined I'd break if something like this ever happened, but I didn't. I just went still. Not hurt. Not angry. Just hollow. It's a strange kind of silence, the one that follows betrayal. Not loud like heartbreak. Not sharp like rage. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breathing, your own thoughts. And somewhere in that silence, I remembered the contract. 5 years ago, during the company's financial crisis, I'd worked closely with Richard, Brandon's father, the real CEO, the one who actually built the place with his own hands and sweat. We'd been struggling to stay afloat. I came up with a proposal, an internal system revamp. I worked nights on that tech, built it with 2 interns and coffee fumes. Richard had said to me one day, "This is your brainchild. If we file the patent, your name goes first." I laughed, thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said it was protection, for me, for the company, in case anything ever went wrong. That same week, he added a clause to my employment contract. I skimmed it back then, didn't think it'd ever matter. But suddenly, it was all I could think about. I pulled out the physical copy from my home filing cabinet. Yes, I still keep physical backups, paranoid or professional, call it what you want. There it was. Section 8.4. In the event of involuntary termination without written cause, the employee shall receive immediate conversion to shareholder status, effective within 72 hours. And the kicker? It included all rights tied to intellectual property contributions. That clause was written by Richard himself. Brandon had no idea it existed. Because Brandon never read the fine print. Brandon didn't even know how the business ran. He'd fired me without blinking, but in doing so, he'd handed me the keys to the one thing he wanted total control over. The next morning, I got a call, unknown number, but I knew the voice instantly. Why the hell did Brandon fire you? It was Richard. He sounded older, worn out, but furious. Did he even read the contract? I didn't say much, just that I had everything I needed. There was a pause. Then he exhaled and said, "Good, that's all. Just good." And I knew then he didn't approve of any of this. He hadn't planned it. And maybe he knew what was coming too. I didn't rush. I didn't storm back into the office or post anything online. Instead, I waited. Waited as Brandon started moving chess pieces without realizing he wasn't playing chess. Waited while he announced a flashy restructure and replaced longtime execs with college buddies in loafers and blazers too tight for their egos. Waited while the board started to shift uncomfortably, sensing something was off. Because revenge? Real revenge isn't loud. It's patient, precise, and it never forgets. He thought he'd buried me, but he forgot. I was holding the shovel. I think Brandon assumed I'd disappear, that I'd vanish into some LinkedIn open-to-work badge and quietly fade. That I'd take my box of memories, tuck my tail between my legs, and move on. Because that's what people like him believe. That power is permanent, and loyalty is weak. But I wasn't waiting for revenge. I was just watching. Because when someone hands you the match and stands next to the gasoline, you don't blow the flame too early. You wait. 3 days after he fired me, the HR department emailed my exit package, a PDF with my severance breakdown. A polite list of transition instructions, no mention of the clause, no acknowledgement of the patent, just a signature line at the bottom that said, "Final agreement, no further claims." I didn't sign it. Instead, I opened a separate folder, the one labeled Executive Contract 2019 Revision. Inside was my original agreement, and tucked into page 5, the quiet little clause Brandon had missed. I read it again, slower this time. In the event of involuntary termination without written cause or due process review, the employee shall be immediately converted to Class C shareholder status, with voting rights and IP protections retained as per Annex C. Class C. It was more than symbolic. It gave me board access, equity voting power, and, most importantly, legal control over any use of my patent. Brandon hadn't just fired me. He'd activated a binding contract that made me part owner of the very company he thought he'd taken over, and he didn't even know it. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my closest colleagues. Because the truth is, betrayal teaches you to go quiet, to stop expecting people to stand up for you when things get uncomfortable. So I became my own witness. I watched the company's LinkedIn page post about their exciting leadership transition. I watched Brandon hold little town halls where he used phrases like vision realignment and fresh blood. I watched him put my face next to a bullet point on a presentation slide labeled Legacy Inefficiencies. It was almost funny. Almost. Because while he was rebranding me as dead weight, I was preparing to pull the rug from beneath him, without lifting a single finger. Then came the board meeting, the one where Brandon was set to announce his formal restructure, department heads gone, new hires locked in, budgets slashed. It was meant to be a rubber stamp vote. Everyone expected him to walk in, smile, shake hands, and leave with total control. But he forgot something. You can't make major executive restructures without shareholder sign-off. And thanks to that tiny clause in my contract, I was now a shareholder, legally, quietly, powerfully. I didn't even RSVP, I just showed up, wearing gray, neutral, nothing flashy. I walked into that glass-walled boardroom like I still belonged. Because I did. Some of the board members looked startled. A few looked guilty, and Brandon? He laughed. Actually laughed. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, waving me off like a fly. That's when Richard, his father, spoke. His voice was hoarse, slower than I remembered, but the weight behind it was the same. "She holds 12.6% voting rights now, because of the contract I approved, the one you clearly didn't read." The room froze. Brandon went pale. His mouth opened, then shut. I think that's when it really hit him. This wasn't just about firing someone. This was about everything he didn't know. I reached into my bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside was a signed legal motion, freezing any leadership restructuring, suspending Brandon's authority over IP until shareholder review, and a formal request for internal audit proceedings, all legally binding, all within my rights. I said nothing else. Didn't gloat, didn't smile, just stood, turned to the board and said, "I trust you'll do the right thing." And then I walked out. I took the elevator down in silence, watched the city skyline shimmer through the glass, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the beginning of the unraveling of the truth rising like smoke through the cracks in his perfect facade. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to let Brandon keep talking, because every word he said from that moment forward would be a nail in his own coffin. He fired me thinking I was powerless, but he forgot. He didn't build the foundation. I did. You'd think after a boardroom ambush like that, Brandon would slow down, read a few documents, consult legal, apologize even. But no. He doubled down. The next morning, a puff piece article appeared online. Young CEO brings bold change to outdated tech firm. My name, omitted. My contributions, erased. The patent, branded as part of his new innovation strategy. He thought if he just spoke confidently enough, no one would question him. He was wrong, and I didn't have to say a single word. Because while he posed for cameras and plastered his face all over LinkedIn, I was working behind the scenes, quiet, focused, surgical. I started with the audit clause. Buried in the shareholder agreement was a right Brandon clearly hadn't read. Any Class C shareholder may initiate a quarterly audit upon formal filing with the board. So I did. A forensic audit of executive actions, financial reallocations, vendor contracts, every backroom deal, every nepotistic hire. I knew there would be something. I just didn't expect it to be so sloppy. Within days, our compliance officer, one of the few decent people left, flagged 3 violations. Unapproved consulting fees paid to one of Brandon's fraternity brothers, a company-sponsored leadership retreat held at a private villa in Turks and Caicos unauthorized. Access to the original patent database. He was digging into my code, trying to rebrand what he didn't build, trying to erase fingerprints that weren't his. But the code was watermarked, quietly, invisibly. A feature I had buried in it like a signature. Any tampering would ping my backup server. And it had, 3 times. Still, I stayed silent, because real power doesn't interrupt. It listens, and I let him keep talking. At the next investor meeting, Brandon stood on stage in front of a 30-foot screen displaying my tech. He called it a fresh rebuild, said it was developed in-house by his new team. That's when I stood up. From the audience, no microphone. No fanfare, just one line. Do your developers have copyright transfer documentation for that code? Silence. He stared at me, eyes wide, a flicker of recognition, then panic, because he didn't, because that code wasn't his, because every investor in that room had just witnessed the collapse of his credibility. I didn't go after him publicly. I didn't write an expose. I did something worse. I handed the proof to the board, quietly, along with a motion to pause all tech rollouts pending investigation, and then I waited. It didn't take long. Suddenly, emails stopped going out. PR campaigns halted. Whispers started, flowing through the halls. Did Brandon fake the rollout? Was the patent really his? The CFO, one of the last remaining senior execs, requested a private meeting with me. "We didn't know," she said. "We thought he had your sign-off." I nodded. No anger, just the weight of the facts between us. He never asked. That was all I needed to say. Then came the final blow. The annual general meeting, held at a rooftop ballroom, branded, catered, polished. The kind of event Brandon lived for. All ego. No substance. I arrived late. Intentionally. The air was too cold for summer, but he was already sweating under the lights. He was midway through a speech about digital transformation when I walked in. Not dramatic, just visible enough to make the room shift. He tried to ignore me, but I stepped forward as his slides flipped to a schematic of my software. And calmly I said, "That image is protected under IP law. You're displaying stolen property." Gasps. And then, on cue, I handed a flash drive to the chairwoman of the board. It contained time-stamped email's original code with metadata, watermark proof screenshots of Brandon editing the files without authorization. The chairwoman looked at him. "Did you obtain rights to use this?" Brandon stammered, mumbled something about gray areas and transition ambiguity. But it was over. I motioned for a legal advisor to pass forward a sealed envelope. Inside was my motion for removal. 9 votes in favor. 3 against, just like that. He was suspended, pending full review. He didn't argue. He didn't storm out. He just sank into the nearest chair like he'd forgotten how to breathe. I left quietly. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the metal. Not smug, not proud, just steady. Because that was the moment I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. Reclaiming the work I'd bled for, the voice I'd silenced for so long, the legacy he thought he could steal with a smirk and a title. And the best part? I still hadn't used everything I had. After the vote, I didn't say a word. I didn't smile. Didn't thank the board. Didn't linger. I just left the room, walked down the hall, and pressed the elevator button like I was just another employee going home for the day. But inside, I was quiet in the way oceans are quiet before they rise. That night, Brandon tried to reach me. 6 missed calls, 3 voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. The last one? He actually sounded small. "I didn't know you were this involved. I didn't know what that clause meant. I trusted the wrong people. Elise, just, can we talk?" It was strange hearing my name in his voice like that. Strained, uncertain. And I realized something. He wasn't a villain. He was a boy who thought the world would move the way he pointed. And when it didn't, he panicked. But I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because some apologies come too late to mean anything. I disappeared for a while, not to run, but to think, to breathe. I rented a cottage by the water. No Wi-Fi, no inbox. Just wind, salt air, and my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, I didn't have to rush anywhere. I slept in. I walked barefoot on cold sand, and at night I journaled in silence. Not about revenge, but about how easy it is to forget your own worth when the world keeps asking you to prove it. Somewhere in that stillness, I decided I didn't want my old job back. I didn't want his desk, or his office, or his nameplate. Because what I'd built for them, what they tossed away so easily, I could build again. But this time? For me. I called 2 former engineers I trusted, the ones I used to mentor. We'd always joked about starting something together one day. That joke turned into a blueprint, then a meeting, then a pitch deck, and within 2 months, we had our first investor, clean tech, transparent equity, no office politics, just vision, just heart. The world didn't need another Brandon. It needed people like us. Back at the company, I heard things were unraveling. Brandon's temporary suspension became permanent. The board quietly replaced him with a crisis manager. Richard, his father, officially retired. I never heard from him again, but I knew what that silence meant. He'd tried to protect the company once, and he saw what happened when he left it in the wrong hands. Then, one day, a letter. It wasn't legal. It wasn't corporate. It was handwritten. Brandon, I know I can't undo anything, but I wanted you to know. I see it now. What you carried, what you built, and what I ruined without even understanding it. I'm sorry. He ended it with, "They told me you were just a manager, not this." I folded the letter once and put it in a drawer. I didn't cry, didn't smile, just felt finished. There's a special kind of freedom in no longer needing someone to understand you. Because the truth? I didn't need Brandon's regret. I didn't need the board's respect. I didn't even need to win. I just needed to remember that I was never replaceable. Weeks later, the board called me, offered me a seat. Leadership, direction, influence. I declined. "I've already started something better," I said. And I meant it. Because revenge, it's not about getting back what you lost. It's about reclaiming who you were before they made you doubt it. Before we launched, I printed something and hung it in our office, above the front desk. A simple document. Framed, the old contract. Clause. Section 8.4. The line Brandon never read. The line that changed everything. Upon wrongful termination without due cause, the party shall be converted to shareholder status. People ask me what it means. Sometimes they laugh. But I just say, it's a reminder of how power moves when no one's watching. And the ones they try to erase? We don't disappear. We rebuild. And we make sure they can't touch it again. I never went back to that building. Not once. But sometimes. I walk by, just long enough to see the light flickering in the lobby windows, the same way it used to when I'd stay late, trying to fix something no one else could. 12 years I gave that place. 12 years of building systems no one else understood. Of coaching interns, calming clients, patching leaks behind the scenes while someone else took credit. Brandon was just the final crack. But the erosion started long before he walked through that door in his too tight suit, high on inheritance and delusion. And that's the part that still stings. Not what he did, but how easy it was for him to do it. We launched the startup quietly. No press, no fireworks, just good code, a small team, and clean intent. The day we signed our first funding deal, my lead engineer brought me champagne. We stood in the empty office, lights still half installed, desks still unboxed. She asked me, "Aren't you going to say something?" I smiled. They called me dead weight. Now look at us. Months passed. Word got out. Clients started reaching out, not because we advertised, but because they remembered the way I worked, the way I handled things, the way I didn't cut corners when no one was watching. One day, I got an email from a former investor at my old company. Subject line: "Coffee?" I declined, not out of spite, but because I didn't need it. The seat at their table was never the prize. I built my own. Then, something unexpected. A journalist reached out, someone doing a retrospective piece on leadership transitions gone wrong. Apparently, the Brandon scandal had made quiet rounds in corporate circles, the leaked audit, the suspension, the erased patent, the vote. They asked if I'd like to comment. I said no. But I sent one thing: a photo of the framed contract clause hanging in our new office. No caption, no follow-up, just that. That image went viral in a way I didn't expect. It started showing up in tech forums, in quiet LinkedIn posts, in startup newsletters. They called it the clause that changed everything. People started whispering again. But this time, they were whispering my name, not in scandal, in respect, and that was enough. One afternoon, I ran into Brandon. It was at a conference neither of us planned to attend, but both got invited to separately. He looked different, smaller, less polished. We locked eyes across the room. He walked over. No arrogance this time. Just the shadow of a man who once thought he couldn't be touched. He said, "You didn't have to destroy me." And I answered, "I didn't. I just stopped protecting you." He didn't respond, just nodded, then walked away, and I let him, because power isn't holding someone under. It's choosing not to. A few years from now, people won't remember Brandon's title, but they'll remember the moment the system he tried to control rejected him, because it wasn't built for him. It was built by people like me. People who stay late, who document everything, who design systems with fingerprints that don't wash off. And that's what no one told him. That legacy isn't loud. It's coded in, it's documented, signed, and time-stamped. Sometimes I still look at the photo of that contract clause, not because I need the reminder, but because I want to remember the woman who first signed it, the version of me who was tired, overlooked, and still kind enough to believe in people who wouldn't believe in her back. She deserved justice, and she got it. But more than that, she got freedom. In the end, I didn't take Brandon's company. I didn't ruin his name. I didn't publish his mistakes or expose his weakness. I simply walked away. And that was the sharpest blade I could ever wield. I never raised my voice. I never raised my hand. I just raised the standard. And when they tried to replace me, I let them, so I could go build something they'd never be able to touch.